Pamplona in July by Ernest Hemingway. In Pamplona, a white-walled, sun-baked town high up in the hills of Navarre, is held in the first 2 weeks of July each year the world's series of bullfighting. Bullfight fans from all Spain jam into the little town. Hotels double their prices and fill every room. The cafes under the wide arcades that run around the Plaza de la Constitucion have every table crowded. The tall pilgrim father sombreros of Andalusia sitting over the same table with straw hats from Madrid, and the flat blue Basque caps of Navarre and the Basque country. Really beautiful girls, gorgeous, bright shawls over their shoulders, dark-eyed, black lace mantillas over their hair, walk with their escorts in the crowds that pass from morning until night along the narrow walk that runs between inner and outer belts of cafe tables, under the shade of the arcade, out of the white glare of the Plaza de la Constitucion. All day and all night there is dancing in the streets. Bands of blue-shirted peasants whirl and lift and swing behind a drum, fife and reed instruments in the ancient Basque ria dances. And at night there is the throb of the big drums and the military band as the whole town dances in the great open square of the plaza. We landed at Pamplona at night. The streets were solid with people dancing. Music was pounding and throbbing. Fireworks were being set off from the big public square. All the carnivals I had ever seen paled down in comparison. A rocket exploded over our heads with a blinding burst and the stick came swirling and whistling down. Dancers, snapping their fingers and whirling in perfect time through the crowd, bumped into us before we could get our bags down from the top of the station bus. Finally, I got the bags through the crowd to the hotel. We had wired and written for rooms 2 weeks ahead. Nothing had been saved. We were offered a single room with a single bed opening onto the kitchen ventilator shaft for $7 a day apiece. There was a big row with the landlady, who stood in front of her desk with her hands on her hips and a broad Indian face perfectly placid, and told us in a few words of French and much Basque Spanish that she had to make all her money for the whole year in the next 10 days. That people would come and that people would have to pay what she asked. She could show us a better room for $10 apiece. We said it would be preferable to sleep in the streets with the pigs. The landlady agreed that it might be possible. We said we preferred it to such a hotel. All perfectly amicable. The landlady considered. We stood our ground. Mrs. Hemingway sat down on our rucksacks. "I can get you a room in a house in the town. You can eat here," said the landlady. "How much?" $5. We started off through the dark and narrow carnival-mad streets with a boy carrying our rucksacks. It was a lovely big room in an old Spanish house with walls thick as a fortress. A cool, pleasant room with a red tile floor and 2 big, comfortable beds set back in an alcove. A window opened out to an iron-grilled porch out over the street. We were very comfortable. All night long the wild music kept up in the streets below. Several times in the night there was a wild roll of drumming, and I got out of bed and across the tiled floor to the balcony. But it was always the same. Men, blue-shirted, bare-headed, whirling and floating in a wild fantastic dance down the streets behind the rolling drums and shrill fifes. Just at daylight there was a crash of music in the streets below. Real military music. Herself was up, dressed, at the window. "Come on," she said. "They're all going somewhere." Down below the streets was full of people. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. They were all going in one direction. I dressed in a hurry and we started after them. The crowd was all going toward the great public square. People were pouring into it from every street and moving out of it toward the open country we could see through the narrow gaps in the high walls. Let's get some coffee, said herself. Do you think we've got time? Hey, what's going to happen? I asked the newsboy. Encierro, he says scornfully. The encierro commences at 6 o'clock. What's the encierro? I asked him. Oh, ask me tomorrow, he said, and started to run. The entire crowd was running now. I got to have my coffee, no matter what it is, herself said. The waiter poured 2 streams of coffee and milk into the glass out of his big kettles. The crowd was still running, coming from all the streets that fed into the plaza. What is this encierro anyway? Herself asked, gulping the coffee. All I know is they let the bulls out into the streets. We started out after the crowd. Out of a narrow gate into a great yellow open space of country with the new concrete bull ring standing high in white and black with people. The yellow and red Spanish flag blowing in the early morning breeze. Across the open and once inside the bull ring, we mounted to the top looking toward the town. It cost a peseta to go up to the top. All the other levels were free. There were easily 20,000 people there. Everyone jammed on the outside of the big concrete amphitheater, looking toward the yellow town with the bright red roofs, where a long wooden pen ran from the entrance to the city gate across the open bare ground to the bull ring. It was really a double wooden fence, making a long entryway from the main streets of the town into the bull ring itself. It made a runway about 250 yards long. People were jammed solid on each side of it, looking up it toward the main street. Then far away there was a dull report. They're off! Everybody shouted. What is it? I asked the man next to me who was leaning far out over the concrete rail. The bulls! They have released them from the corrals on the far side of the city. They are racing through the city. Phew, said herself. What did they do that for? Then down the narrow fenced-in runway came a crowd of men and boys running as hard as they could go. The gates feeding into the bull ring was open, and they all ran pell-mell under the entrance levels into the ring. Then there came another crowd, running even harder, straight up the long pen from the town. Where are these bulls? Asked herself. Then it came in sight, 8 bulls galloping along, full tilt, heavy set, black, glistening, sinister, their horns bare, tossing their heads. And running with them 3 steers with bells on their necks. They ran in a solid mass, and ahead of them sprinted, tore, ran, and bolted the rear guard of the men and boys of Pamplona who had allowed themselves to be chased through the streets for a morning's pleasure. A boy in his blue shirt, red sash, white canvas shoes with the inevitable leather wine bottle hung from his shoulders, stumbled as he sprinted down the straightaway. The first bull lowered his head and made a jerky sideways toss. The boy crashed up against the fence and lay there limp, the herd running solidly together past him up. The crowd roared. Everybody made a dash for the inside of the ring, and we got into a box just in time to see the bulls come into the ring filled with men. The men ran in a panic to each side. The bulls, still bunched solidly together, ran straight with the trained steers across the ring and into the entrance that led to the pens. That was the entry. Every morning during the bull fighting festival of San Fermin at Pamplona, the bulls are to fight in the afternoon are released from the corrals at 6 o'clock in the morning and race through the main streets of the town for a mile and a half to the pen. The men who run ahead of them do it for the fun of the thing. It had been going on each year since a couple hundred years before Columbus had his historic interview with Queen Isabella in the camp outside of Granada. There are 2 things in favor of there being no accidents. First, that the fighting bulls are not aroused and vicious when they are together. Second, that the steers are relied upon to keep them moving. Sometimes things go wrong. A bull will be detached from the herd as they pile through into the pen with his crest up, a ton of speed and viciousness, his needle-sharp horns lowered, will charge again and again into the packed mass of men and boys in the bull ring. There is no place for the men to get out of the ring. It is too jammed for them to climb over the barrera or red fence that rims the field. They have to stay in and take it. Eventually, the steers get the bull out of the ring and into the pen. He may wound or kill 30 men before they can get him out. No armed men are allowed to oppose him. That is the chance the Pamplona bullfight fans take every morning during the feria. It is the Pamplona tradition of giving the bulls a final shot at everyone in town before they enter the pens. They will not leave until they come out into the glare of the arena to die in the afternoon. Consequently, Pamplona is the toughest bullfight town in the world. The amateur fight that comes immediately after the bulls have entered the pens proves that. Every seat in the great amphitheater is packed. About 300 men with capes, all pieces of cloth, old shirts, anything that will imitate a bullfighter's cape, are singing and dancing in the arena. There is a shout, and the bull pen opens. Out comes a young bull just as fast as he can come. On his horns are leather knobs to prevent his goring anyone. He charges and hits a man, tosses him high in the air, and the crowd roars. The man comes down on the ground, and the bull goes for him, bumping him with his head, roaring him with his horns. Several amateur bullfighters are flopping their capes in his face to make the bull charge and leave the man on the ground. Then the bull charges and bags another man. The crowd roars with delight. Then the bull will turn like a cat and get somebody who has been acting very brave about 10 feet behind him. Then he will toss a man over the fence. Then he picks out one man and follows him in a wild twisting charge through the entire crowd until he bags him. The barbera is packed with men and boys sitting along the top, and the bull decides to clear them all off. He goes along, hooking carefully with his horn and dropping them off with the toss of his horns like a man pitching hay. Each time the bull bags someone, the crowd roars with joy. Most of it is home talent stuff. The braver the man has been, or the more elegant pass he has attempted with his cape before the bull gets him, the more the crowd roars. No one is armed. No one hurts or plagues the bull in any way. A man who grabbed the bull by the tail and tries to hang on was hissed and booed by the crowd. The next time he tried it was knocked down by another man in the bull ring. No one enjoys it all more than the bull. As soon as he shows signs of tiring from his charges, the two old steers, one brown and the other looking like a big Holstein, come trotting in and alongside the young bull, who falls in behind them like a dog and follows them meekly on a tour of the arena and then out. Another comes right in, and the charging and tossing, the ineffectual cave waving, and the wonderful music are repeated right over again. But always different. Some of the animals in this morning amateur fight are steers, fighting bulls from the best strain who had some imperfection or other in build, so they can never command the high prices paid for the combat animals. 2,000 to 3,000 apiece. But there is nothing lacking in their fighting spirit. The show comes off every morning. Everybody in town turns out at 5:30 when the military bands go through the streets. Many of them stay up all night for it. We didn't miss one, and in this Calcase sporting event, that will get us both up at 5:30 o'clock in the morning for 6 days running. As far as I know, we were the only English-speaking people in Pamplona during the feria of last year. There were 3 minor earthquakes while we were there. Terrific cloudbursts in the mountains and the Ebro River flooded out to Zaragoza. For 2 days the bull ring was underwater and the corrida had to be suspended for the first time in over 100 years. That was during the middle of the fair. Everyone was desperate. On the 3rd day it looked gloomier than ever, poured rain all morning, and then at noon the clouds rolled away up across the valley. The sun came out bright and hot and baking, and that afternoon there was the greatest bullfight I will perhaps ever see. There were rockets going up in the air, and the arena was nearly full when we got into our regular seats. The sun was hot and baking. Over on the other side, we could see the bullfighters standing ready to come in, all wearing their oldest clothes because of the heavy, muddy going in the arena. We picked out the 3 matadors of the afternoon with our glasses. Only one of them was new. Olmos, a chubby-faced, jolly-looking man, something like Chris Speaker. The others we had seen often before. Mera, dark, spare, and deadly-looking, one of the very greatest toreros of all time. The third, young Agabeno, the son of a famous bullfighter, a slim young Andalusian with a charming Indian-looking face. All were wearing the suits they had probably started bullfighting with, too tight, old-fashioned, outmodeled. There was a procession of entrants. The wild bullfight music played. The preliminaries were quickly over. The picadors retired along the red fence with their horses. The heralds sounded their trumpets, and the door of the bullpen swung open. The bull came out in a rush, saw a man standing near the barrera, and charged him. The man vaulted over the fence, and the bull charged the barrera. He crashed into the fence in full charge and ripped the 2x8 plank solidly out in a splintering smash. He broke his horn doing it, and the crowd called for a new bull. The trained steers trotted in. The bull fell in meekly behind them, and 3 of them trotted out of the arena. The next bull came in with the same rush. He was Mara's bull, and after perfect cape play, Mara planted the banderilleros. Mara is herself's favorite bullfighter, and if you want to keep any conception of yourself as a brave, hard, perfectly balanced, thoroughly competent man in your wife's mind, never take her to a real bullfight. I used to go into the amateur fights in the morning to try and win back a small amount of her esteem, but the more I discovered that bullfighting required a very great quantity of a certain type of courage, of which I had an almost complete lack, the more it became apparent that any admiration she might ever develop for me would have to be simply an antidote to the real admiration for Mara and Vilalta. You cannot compete with bullfighters on their own ground, if anywhere. The only way most husbands are able to keep any drag with their wives at all is that, first, there is only a limited number of bullfighters. Second, there are only a limited number of wives who have ever seen bullfights. Mara planted his first pair of banderilleros sitting down on the edge of the little step-up that runs around the barrera. He snarled at the bull, and then, as the animal charged, leaned back tight against the fence, and as the horns struck on either side of him, swung forward over the brute's head and planted the 2 darts in his hump. He planted the next pair the same way, so near to us we could have leaned over and touched him. Then he went out to kill the bull, and after he made an absolutely unbelievable passes with the red little cloth of the muleta, drew up his sword, and as the bull charged, Mara thrust. The sword shot out of his hand, and the bull caught him. He went up in the air on the horns of the bull, and then came down. Young Agabeno flopped his cape in the bull's face. The bull charged him, and Mara staggered to his feet, but his wrist was sprained. With his wrist sprained so that every time he raised it to sight for a thrust, it brought beads of sweat out on his face, Mara tried again and again to make his death thrust. He lost the sword and again, picked it up with his left hand from the mud floor of the arena, and transferred it to the right for the thrust. Finally he made it, and the bull went over. The bull nearly got him 20 times. As he came in to stand up under us at the barrera side, his wrist was swollen to twice the normal size. I thought of prize fighters I had seen quit because they had hurt their hands. There was almost no pause while the moles galloped in and hitched on to the first bull and dragged him out, and the second came in with a rush. The picadors took the first shock of him with their bull lances. There was the snort and the charge, the shock and the mass against the sky, the wonderful defense by the picador with his lance that held off the bull, and then Rosario almost stepped out with his cape. Once he flopped the cape at the bull and floated it around in an easy, graceful swing. Then he tried the same swing, the classic Veronica, and the bull caught him at the end of it. Instead of stopping at the finish, the bull charged on in. He caught almost squarely with his horn, hoisted him high in the air. He fell heavily, and the bull was on top of him, driving his horns again and again into him. Almost laid on the sand, his head on his arms. One of his teammates was flopping his cape madly in the bull's face. The bull lifted his head for an instant and charged and got his man. Just one terrific toss. Then he whirled and chased a man just in back of him toward the barrera. The man was running full tilt, and as he put his hand on the fence to vault it, the bull had him and caught him with his horn, shooting him way up into the crowd. He rushed toward the fallen man he had tossed, who was getting to his feet and all alone. Agabeno grabbed him by the tail. He hung on until I thought he or the bull would break. The wounded man got to his feet and started away. The bull turned like a cat and charged Agabeno, and Agabeno met him with the cape. Once, twice, 3 times he made the perfect, floating, slow swing with the cape. Perfectly, graceful, debonair, back on his heels, baffling the bull. And he had command of the situation. There never was such a scene at any World Series game. There are no substitute matadors allowed. Nero was finished. His wrist could not lift a sword for weeks. Almost had been gored badly through the body. It was Agabeno's bull, this one and the next 5. He handled them all, did it all. Cape play easy, graceful, confident. Beautiful work with the muleta, and serious, deadly killing. 5 bulls he killed, one after the other, and each one was a separate problem to be worked out with death. At the end there was nothing debonair about him. It was only a question if he would last through or if the bulls would get him. They were all very wonderful bulls. "He is a very great kid," said herself. "He is only 20. "I wish we knew him," I said. "Maybe we will someday," she said, then considered a moment. "He will probably be spoiled by then." They make 20,000 a year. That was just 3 months ago. It seems in a different century now, working in an office. It is a very long way from the sun-baked town of Pamplona, where the men race through the streets in the mornings ahead of the bulls, to the morning ride, to work on a Bay Caledonia car. But it is only 14 days by water to Spain, and there is no need for a castle. There is always that room of 5 Calais de Eslava, and a son, if he is to redeem the family reputation as a bullfighter, must start very early.